Welcome to episode 5 of Project Versus. A quick recap of what happened in the previous episode. I went ahead and bought another set of Yonex Polytour Rev. That came out to £14.60 altogether, and so our new budget is £12.93. I have strung it up in the Head Prestige, so now we have 2 rackets with the same string, and we're going to go out on court, test them both, and see which one is more effective at executing the play style we want to execute. And I shortlisted a few strings to help us out with the slice serve, and in particular getting more free points. So on the precision side of things, I had a look at the Dunlop Black Widow 16, added that to the list, and also the Headhawk 1.20. These 2 strings had the kind of attributes I look for when I'm seeking a string that will give us more precision, and so we're able to hit the lines more consistently. And the other 2 strings that I shortlisted were more suited for adding slice onto the spin, so when I'm looking to drag the opponent out of position and open up the options out on court for us. And these 2 strings were the Luxilent Eco Power 17 and also the Pacific Poly Power Pro. So those were the 4 that I've added to the shortlist. We don't really have the budget at the moment to buy and test them out. Hopefully that will change because I'm looking to play a few more tournaments soon. We also identified the forehand cross court as a weakness in my game. It is a shot I definitely need in my arsenal because in so many rallies you come into a situation where it is the highest percentage play, and so not to be able to play it is pretty much unacceptable. And it's not that I can't play it, it's just not as good as my inside out forehand or my down the line forehand. It doesn't come as natural to me, and so we are going to do some drills on that. But in the previous episode I shortlisted 2 rackets that I thought would help us with the forehand cross court. Unfortunately our budget does not allow us to buy them at this moment. Hopefully that will change in the future. But the first racket I shortlisted was the Prince NXG Graphite Mid. That's the 92 square inch head size. And I also shortlisted the Dunlop Aerogel 4D 200. Both pretty similar rackets to the Power Bridge 10 that we're using at the moment, just a few attributes that would help us in regards to the directional control. So I thought that would help us, as that is kind of what I struggle with, is getting the direction correct on my cross court forehand. So yeah, actually let's get straight on to the drills, see how I got on. The first setup I'm using is the usual Power Bridge 10 mid, but with the Wilson dampener. So that's an interesting start, wide and lots of height over the net. But I think as the drill goes on I get a better feel for the placement of the cross court shot. Because my spin naturally is away from the right-hander's backhand, I feel that that might be a reason why I struggle to play the cross court forehand, more so than the inside out forehand and the down the line as well. But yeah, we try a few different shots here. The feeds are from different positions as well to try and mix it up, make it a little bit more difficult and make me have to think on my feet, just like you have to do in the middle of a match. But it's not too bad, I'm guessing. A few misses, that one's alright to be fair. I like the trajectory on that and the way it moves through the court. So I'm striking the ball pretty well with the setup at the moment. And that one was quite a sharp angle. Unfortunately, I did not mean it. Of course, in a match situation, I'm taking it every single time, but yeah, I'm not actually meaning it. I'm trying to hit those cones in the corner, as you can see. Some shots are going 3-4 meters away from my target, so a lot of work needs to be done on it. And we do about 4 of these drills in total, and each drill is with a slightly different setup. So yeah, this one I don't feel like it was my favourite. I hit a few decent forehands cross court, but upcoming is the setups with no dampener. Hopefully we'll be able to hit the target at least once in this drill. I believe I do, if I remember correctly. This is the setup with no dampener now. And even in the previous drill, I thought I was striking the ball pretty well, although some of the shots were a bit erratic. I mean, that's just my game at the moment, hence why we're doing the drill. But overall, I'm striking the ball cleaner than I was, a couple of weeks ago. But yes, with the no dampener on the Power Bridge 10, I definitely preferred this. And when you play with no dampener as opposed to with a dampener, you would expect a little less height control, a little less directional control, but sacrificing that, you get a bit more length control in return, because there is less shot speed off of the setup, and also because there's a bit more string movement, you actually have more access to snapback. So with the correct technique, you'll be able to hit with more spin. Oh, I actually hit the cone for once there. So that one was not great. That was about 5 meters from my target, and it actually knocks the camera out of position, so we can't even see the bottom right corner. Yeah, a bit erratic, but this is just me, how I play after a while. Consistency is not the strongest point of my game, but that's tennis for you. But yeah, as I was talking about no dampener compared to having a setup with a dampener, you'd also expect a little bit more spin because you've got more dwell time without a dampener. As the strings, or the main strings, move on the cross strings, the ball is able to sink more into the string bed, hence the longer dwell time. And with a longer dwell time, the string has more time to grab onto the ball, and with the correct technique, hopefully launch it off with more spin. Was the Power Bridge 10 with no dampener. I actually preferred that over the dampener setup, so I'm going to make a note of that. And here is the Prestige Mid with the newly strung Polytour Rev. And we've got a dampener on the setup to start off with, and I must say I like this setup. I was able to strike the ball pretty cleanly on a regular basis, and just the sound it makes when it comes into contact with the ball is pretty cool. Yeah, I think you can tell I'm striking the ball a bit cleaner, the ball's moving through the court a bit quicker. I am definitely. I thought maybe it's just me being biased, but yeah, definitely am. And in the previous drills, I noticed I was struggling a little bit when the ball was fed short and I had to move up the court, because I struggled with the control over the height and the direction. Some of the balls were going wide, some of them were going long. That's something I need to work on as well. But in this drill with this setup, even the balls that were fed to me short and I had to move up the court, I was controlling the length pretty well, and so I've still managed to hit close enough to the cones where I'm giving myself a chance to strike them. So not too bad. Again, hitting through the ball, I would say more so with this setup than the previous two. And even when pushed back, like you saw there, I was able to hit through the ball. Interesting stuff to see. And so the next setup after this will be with no dampener, and we'll compare this one with the no dampener setup and see which one is better. I'm considering going into my next practice match with no dampener on the Power Bridge 10 and seeing how that goes, because I was quite happy, even though we have a little less directional and trajectory control. I think the extra length control more than makes up for it, and it definitely helps on my serve, which we will have a look at in a bit. The slice serve in particular, I thought benefited quite a lot from it. Okay, moving on to the fourth and final drill. This is the Prestige Mid with the newly strung Polytour Rev, but no dampener. And I think you can even see from my technique here how I'm striking the ball with that inside out spin, but still going cross court. Pretty interesting technique. I don't see many players hitting a forehand like this. That was pretty nice, moving up the court. Much better than I was in the beginning. And that's not a compliment, by the way, it's just something I don't see very often. I have an Eastern forehand grip. That's why I strike through the ball more than you would usually see. A lot of players, they're using, I would say, at least a semi-Western grip on average at the moment. I play a few guys regularly who have quite extreme grips on the forehand side, and you can tell just by the arc of their shot and the bounce of the shot, especially in the sun. It's difficult to deal with. But me, I'm a little bit more old school. I strike through the ball. And in this drill, it doesn't look too bad. It actually looks like I'm kind of slapping the ball at times, especially there. When I get the trajectory correct, I can really get the ball moving through the court, especially when this AstroTurf surface has a little bit of dampness to it. I can get the ball skidding through it, and players do not like the ball skidding through onto them on this AstroTurf surface. So yeah, a few erratic shots again. I mean, you'd need at least a few in my drills for it to be a proper drill in my case, but not too bad. I felt I was getting my eye in the more I played this drill, and so I'm quite happy with it. I thought it was pretty successful, and hopefully we can take that success into future practice sessions and future tournaments that I've got lined up. Right, that was an interesting drill using the dampener with the setup and then without dampener. When you do this, you would expect the setup without the dampener to have a bit more dwell time, because the strings are able to move a bit more, so the mains will slide on the crosses and the ball will sink a little bit more into the strings, hence the dwell time is a little longer, and as a result your shot speed off of the string bed should be lower, which increases the length control. And on top of that, because the dwell time is a little bit longer, you would expect a little bit more comfort as the impact is spread out over a slightly longer duration. So something to bear in mind there. And also, when you take the dampener off, you would expect a little bit less control in terms of height, direction and trajectory. Because of the extra string movement, it creates a little bit more unpredictability, and we'd have to bear that in mind if we were deciding between going for a setup with the dampener or without the dampener. Of course, it can get a little bit more complicated than that even, and you can actually place the dampener at the bottom of the string bed or halfway up towards the bottom of the cross string. But we're not going to do that because there's no need to complicate it at this moment. We might go into more detail at a later date. So I'm going to compare the two rackets for now. I thought that they both performed pretty well. I did prefer the setup without the dampener, so the extra length control, but without the height and directional control. So that was interesting to know, but let's bring up these stats for both rackets. And we've got the Prestige Mid here coming out with a speed of 65.0 miles an hour compared to the PowerBridge 10 at 64.3 miles an hour. I feel like this is pretty noticeable on the court. Even with those brand new strings, the power was still, in terms of shot speed, was still noticeably higher. And so when that tension drops after a few hours of play, and even more so after a few weeks of play, the higher launch angle, the extra distance, and the higher shot speed will be even more noticeable. So that's interesting to note. And moving across to the vibration frequency, the Prestige Mid is a lot higher at 145 Hertz to 135 for the PowerBridge 10. And again, that's very noticeable on the court. You can feel the shock going up your arm. Fortunately, I haven't had to deal with an elbow injury or any arm injury since I've come back from my original arm injury. So we will keep an eye on that. But as I've said before, a higher vibration will usually mean an increase in the trajectory control, the directional and height control. And I feel like that was noticeable, but it's also important to take note that the strings were brand new. So even though the setup felt fantastic in terms of controlling the height and direction, the string bed was brand new. So we need to take it out a few more times on court, and then after a couple of weeks, we'll have a more fair assessment and comparison with the main setup we're using at the moment. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on the width of both rackets. The Prestige Mid, despite being the same head size as the PowerBridge 10 at 93 square inches, the width is actually noticeably higher at 23 centimeters compared to the PowerBridge at 22.4. Thickness, so that means the beam width of the frame is a tiny bit thicker at 21 millimeters compared to 20. It doesn't make too much of a difference in terms of being able to swing at sharper angles and not worry about clipping the frame, as the extra width gives us that margin for error, that extra spin window. So really interesting. And if I was being honest, I did prefer the Prestige Mid, but I can't make the change yet because, as I said, we need to wait a couple weeks for a more fair assessment as the strings start to lose tension, and then we can make a decision from there. So yeah, from that test alone, I think I'm leaning towards not using the dampener. But we've got this serve drill coming up. I'm going to show you how that got on, and then after we'll decide whether we're going into our next practice match with or without the dampener and what racket we're going to use. Okay, the serve and drill is pretty simple. I'm going to be on the juice side, slicing the serve out wide and trying to hit the cones that are placed in the corner of the service box. And I'll be using 4 different setups again, 2 with dampeners, 2 without, and obviously the 2 rackets that are in my inventory, the Prestige Mid and the PowerBridge 10. So let's see how we got on. Alright, so this is the setup with the dampener, the PowerBridge 10, our main setup at the moment. And you can see there's a few errors straight away. I'm still trying to get a feel for the slice serve and actually hit the cone on that attempt, which was a nice surprise. After about 10 serves, I think the feel was a little bit better, but again, with this setup, I've never been fully comfortable. And so that's the reason why I've decided to try the setup without the dampener and see if I can have more success. So here we have the attempt without the dampener, and after 2 serves I actually hit the cones on this occasion. And I actually hit it twice, I didn't even realise, so that's pretty interesting. I was going to say I preferred this setup, and without the dampener, as I've said, you get a little bit more length control, so I don't have to worry about the ball going long as much, but I do sacrifice a bit in trajectory control. So yeah, not too bad. I'm managing to get a little bit more slice from that extra dwell time and deflection. And here we move on to the Prestige mid with the dampener. And straight away I noticed the extra power. I didn't really like this at all, to be honest. I had no control over the length. I'm trying to hit with a lot of spin, but just by increasing your swing speed doesn't actually mean you're going to have more control over length. In fact, it increases the risk of the ball going long if your technique isn't correct. And my slice serve is definitely not correct at the moment. But here we have the setup with no dampener, and again I thought this was much more effective for the slice serve, not having to worry too much about the length. I want to rephrase that actually, not having to worry as much about the ball going long. And this is a freshly strung Polytour Rev, hence why I hit the cone there. And so it might be a little bit different after a couple of weeks of play. Again, we'll have to revisit this drill. But overall, I'd have to say I definitely preferred both setups without the dampener when it came to slicing the ball on the serve. I didn't get the chance to slice it on the ad side. I'm not sure if it will be any different, but I suspect it would be a little bit easier, just as it was on the juice side. Reflecting on both the cross-court drills and the serving drills, I have decided that I'm going to go into my next practice match with the Power Bridge 10 with no dampener. I did prefer that in both drills, to be fair. The extra length control definitely offset the loss in trajectory and directional control. And so I want to test it in a more competitive situation against a player that hits hard. And this guy that I play on a regular basis, he wins about 75 to 80% of sets, so he's definitely more advanced than I am. And so it will be a good test to see where I am in terms of my level. I did want to talk about the Prestige mid. That setup was actually my favorite of all of the setups, the one with no dampener. But I don't want to make the decision now to switch to it because it was freshly strung. It's not really a fair comparison with the Power Bridge 10 at the moment. In a couple weeks time, after maybe drilling with it a few more times, I could revisit the comparison and see if I want to make the switch and make that my main setup. But for now, I don't think it's a good idea to do so. Although I did want to say it felt amazing on court. The control over both length and trajectory, man, it's one of the best setups I've used in a while. And so, yeah, just wanted to mention that. A quick player profile on my opponent for the practice match. He's roughly about 5'10" with a big first flat serve. The second serve is a slice serve, so it's difficult to attack on the slicker AstroTurf surface that we usually play on. His forehand is quite extreme with a Western grip, and his backhand is two-handed and very strong in pretty much all the conditions I've seen him play in. The weather conditions are quite cold at 4 to 5 degrees Celsius, but the sun is coming out, so it's actually helping his weaker side, which is the forehand side, and it's making the ball bounce higher, and the spin through the air is noticeable. So the arc is steeper, and it can potentially cause problems for his opponents. Okay, so the first set score ended 6-4 to my opponent. I got off to a very slow start, 3-love down, in pretty much the blink of an eye. The first 3 drop shots I tried all ended in errors, so not a great start. I managed to battle my way back into the set as it went on and get myself into more return games. Unfortunately, at 5-4, even though I got him to juice, he just hit a few first serves when it really mattered, and I couldn't neutralize the point. He always stayed ahead in the rally, and so he executed the service game pretty much to his liking and took the set. And overall, looking back at it, I thought I played decently well after the initial poor start. It was the first setup, well, the first time I've used the new setup with no dampener and I was trying to take the ball early. I did notice that the blocked return is very ineffective, especially when the sun comes out and it dries that court. It was just allowing the ball to sit up, and even if I did so onto his weaker side, which is the forehand side, he had too much time really to wind up on that forehand, and rather than be a weakness, it actually became an effective shot. And so I can't see that as an option going forward, especially as we're moving into the summer months. I know this is the UK and we're famous for our wet weather, but we are going to have a few days at least where the sun is going to be blazing down, drying out the court, and so the blocked return or even slice is overall just not as effective in the sunnier, drier conditions. And so we're going to have to work around that. And let's get on to the second set anyway. This ended 6-all, and then we ran out of time. He had to go and do some coaching. Unfortunately, it would have been interesting to see who would have won the tie break. But judging by the amount of sets that he wins, which is around 75 to 80%, I'm guessing he was more likelier to win that. But I did play better in the second set, mainly because from the off, I was on it, and I did get a feel for the drop shots as the match went on. It was a lot different to the setup with the dampener. I had to adjust my feel on it, I had to adjust my length and where I'm aiming. Even just a small difference as taking the dampener off of the string bed, it means you have to change your technique drastically on a few shots, especially the drop shot. And yeah, just something to bear in mind. I was trying to take the ball early, and I think this is a good option, especially in the conditions, rather than letting that ball kick up high and driving me behind the baseline too far. If I can take the ball early, that is probably the more effective option, and the setup does allow me to do that. Despite the decrease in the height and directional control, I was still able to take the ball early like I wanted to as part of my pre-match strategy. And so it's worth bearing that in mind, that the increase in length control does offset the decrease in trajectory control. Right, so I know we've touched on the ineffectiveness of the slice in the conditions, but I did want to mention that when the blocked return was taken early, so roughly about 2 to 3 foot inside the baseline, it actually turned out to be quite effective, especially if I was able to block the return onto his forehand side, as he needs a little bit more time on that side to wind up and hit the forehand. And so overall, in a rally situation, it's probably best to avoid the slice, or if I'm on the baseline returning, it's probably best to try and avoid blocking the return. If I'm able, maybe on a second serve, or if I can see where he's going to play the next ground stroke with reasonable accuracy, then I should take a few steps in, a couple foot inside the baseline, and try to block the return or the slice towards his baseline and try and rob him of time. At least I thought that was an interesting, effective strategy. And so we get on to the reason why I changed to the no dampener setup in the first place, which was the slice serve. And overall, it was absolutely more effective with no dampener. I did not have to worry too much about the ball going long, and so in fact I was able to be a bit more aggressive on both the first serve and the second serve. In fact, I was, especially when the sun comes out, you can hit with a little bit more spin. I really was going all out on a lot of these serves, something I'm unable to do through fear of making too many errors on the serves. And at least that's alleviated the problem somewhat, not completely. We still need a whole lot of improvement if I'm going to be happy with the serve overall, but it is an effective way to start the point, at least on the first serve, and I'm able to get my opponent out of the court on the deuce side, especially if I'm able to slice it at a sharp enough angle. So again, an interesting match. Hopefully we can close the gap further the next time we play our practice matches, and yeah, I'll keep you updated. I do have a couple tournaments scheduled, one for this weekend upcoming. That would be a grade 4 tournament, so a little bit more difficult than the grade 5 we played a couple weeks ago. And then the following weekend, we have a grade 5 tournament scheduled. So I'm hoping to get as many competitions in before the summer months, really get the budget up as it's looking a bit thin at the moment. And that concludes this episode. I do want to thank everyone for watching. If you do have any suggestions, just drop them in the comments. I do take everything on board. And if you enjoyed this episode, it might be worth checking out our other content and staying tuned for future episodes that will be coming out soon. I also want to mention that I have a new private subreddit where the users can contribute their findings. We can analyze each other's setups and accelerate each other's learning process. At least that is the goal. So if it sounds like something you'd be interested in, just drop your Reddit user in the comments, or if you don't want to drop it in the comments, if you want to email it to me at cupenyatennis@hotmail.com and I'll approve you. You won't be able to find the subreddit until I approve you, as it is a private subreddit. But yeah, I'll hopefully see you all there and all of you on future episodes. And until then, everyone, take care.